Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday morning practice. Yesterday marked the death of one of our famous spiritual master, Thich Nhat Hanh. We'll dedicate today's practice to him, and today I will also talk about the meaning of the verses that I'm about to recite in dedication of Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh. So let's put our hands together. This would be done in Pali, the original language of the historical Buddha. Namo tasso arahato bhagavato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tasso arahato bhagavato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tasso arahato bhagavato sama sambuddhassa. I would explain this verse at the end of today's class. It's in honor of a future Buddha, Thich Nhat Hanh. So let me take a break, and then we can do the breathing exercise. But let me take a break, and I promise to really, for the first time in this class, to explain our spiritual practice. And I did it by way of a verse that I used to recite in honor of Thich Nhat Hanh. First of all, let me explain the word Thich Nhat Hanh. Anybody who knows what that stands for? Now, at first glance, the Vietnamese and the Chinese language are very, very different, right? And that's because when the French came to Vietnam, they Romantized the language. So they completely get rid of the written language and reinvent a new one that is like the pronunciation. But the pronunciation is actually very similar. So I have friends who are Vietnamese, and sometimes we compare it, it's almost identical. Now, Nhat Hanh means yi xing, one path. That's what it means, one path. Now the Han, the word xing, Thich Nhat Hanh. Han, or in Chinese is the xing, is written very interestingly. It's written with two parts. Half of them is two people together. The other half is like the street. So that word is actually very interesting. It's actually very relevant to what we do here. So we talk about the 5 elements, and then we talk about the 4 elements. And that's an unfortunate translation, because in Chinese they're completely different. When we talk about the 4 elements, that's the basic element. So we talk about the wind, the fire, the earth, and the water, right? And that has to do with how you sense it. So I talk about how the wind is something you cannot see, you cannot smell, you cannot taste, you cannot hear, but you can touch. Earth is something you can see, you can smell, you can taste, you can hear, and you can touch. Fire is, and so forth and so on. So in that case, the 4 elements are actual elements. Unfortunately, when we talk about the 5 elements, it's an unfortunate translation, because the Chinese word for that is xing. It's the same as Thich Nhat Hanh. It's the same word. So in that case, it almost means like agents of change, right? Because xing also is used for the planet. So when we talk about the star that is rotating, that's a xing xing, right? The star that walks. So xing can mean many things. It can mean exercise, it can mean a path, but it basically means change. It's change. But it also means volition. So when we talk about mind, and we say the mind is not the thinking mind, because the thinking mind is part of the brain. So we talk about the brain being the 6th sense door, the 6th sense organ. the eye, the nose, the tongue, the ear, the body, and the mind. So the mind, in this case, the brain, is part of the body. But so what is the spiritual mind? So that comes from the concept called the five skandhas. The five skandhas have something called the Gaia, which is everything that has to do with our body as well as the outside. It's both the physics and the physiology. So that's all there is. All the physicality is embodied into this first skandha called the Gaia. The next one is called sensation. Now, you will notice that, for example, yoga practice, the ancient yoga practice, and where the Chinese also borrow and become the Qi practice, they work a lot on the spiral cord. They work a lot on the spiral cord. Actually, there's a unfortunate the emphasis of the spiral cord in the Western world. We think that the brain is the entirety of your intellectual system. We think that intellect is the same as intellectual. No. Actually, the spiral cord is a much more important aspect of our intellectual system. All of the nerve ending goes into the spiral cord. So when you go from the Gaia, the body, to the form, to the sensation, it's basically going from the physics, the physiology, to the neurology. And the neurology is all about the spiral cord. Now then the next one is called perception. The perception is when you take all the sensors and you actually assign value to it. This is the self. This is how you actually have preference. I like it, I don't like it. This all has to do with memory. It's a learned experience. That has to do with your brain. That's where the brain comes in. But that's only 3 of the 5 skandhas. The other 2 is volition, is when you actually generate a thought. And that's the same word that Thich Nhat Hanh uses for his Dharma name, is Xing. Right? So our practice is all about how to manage that volition. How do we take in the sensors, understanding that the object is brown, the object is round, the object is triangle, the object is cold, and then combining them, forming into an object that is ice cream or not ice cream or something else, and then eventually develop a sense of like and dislike. And within that, there's 51 what we call the mental factors. Out of the what we call the akusala mental factors, we converge that into what we call the 5 hindrances, and that's what I mentioned earlier. And spiritual practice is all about understanding that process, because the next one, the last one called consciousness, is where the volition, the mental factor, leaves behind a memory in what we call the karma. Karma is just a memory, okay? So everything that happens in our universe is electrical, and with it generate magnetism. With magnetism, there's a memory. So every thought you have leaves behind an imprint. The problem is that that imprint is a seed for the next thought. And so when someone takes a gun and go to a kindergarten and start shooting up kids, the kids have nothing to do with that hatred. The hatred is inside. It's in their karma. It's that they continue to have these hatred thoughts, and it just self-generates. And so anxiety, you really deal with anxiety, you need to understand how that mind and the body work together. Okay? Now, so what does that mean? Why did I choose that verse that I did in honor of Thich Nhat Hanh? First of all, Thich Nhat Hanh has a lot of meaning. I just explained that. Nhat Hanh means Yi Qing, one path. Okay? But the verse I use is Namo Tasso Arahato Bhagavato Sama Sambuddhassa. Contained in that is 3 of the honorary terms that we use for the Buddha. Someone who's a Buddha is someone who's awakened, someone who actually understands the inner working of the mind. And Thich Nhat Hanh is one of those. And so it's very appropriate that we use the verse to honor him. And we honor him as a Arahato, as a Bhagavato, as a Samasambuddhasa. What's an arahato? Arahato is someone who practices to a point that they alleviate them of the attachment to the body, to the desire. That's someone who Thich Nhat Hanh is. Okay, so it's a term that we give to someone who have practiced to a level where they no longer have anxiety, that they're so beyond that, right? What's Bhakkarato? Bhakkarato is a teacher who not only teach, but who have dedicated their life to alleviate pain and suffering of the normal sentient beings, not just humans, any kind of beings. A little known fact about Thich Nhat Hanh. When I came to this country in 1971, right at the tail end of the Vietnam War, the reason we didn't come earlier is because I have two brothers. We have three sons in the family. Had we come in '68, we would have been drafted, and I doubt that all of us would return from Vietnam War alive. So we postponed that. In the beginning of Vietnam War, Martin Luther King was focused on racial equity. He really wasn't paying attention to the Vietnam War yet. It was Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a young monk from Vietnam, who decided to travel to the United States and asked for a meeting with Dr. King and convinced Dr. King that he should be focusing on Vietnam War and opposing the Vietnam War. And at first Dr. King says, why should I care? I'm more focused on the equity the inequity that the colored peoples have suffered, both the black and the brown and the yellow. And it was Thich Nhat Hanh that says, no, he says, all wars are wars of economics. It's the poor who are suffering. The rich people don't suffer, which is true. At the beginning of the Vietnam War, those who can afford to go to college, they were exempt. It was very clear those who went to Vietnam and died in Vietnam were people of color. Similarly, when I go to the prison, 80 to 90% of the inmates were people of color. It's an equity in the society that is just a fact. And so it was Thich Nhat Hanh who convinced Dr. King that the war in Vietnam is the war on poverty, and he should fight that war as much as he fight for inequity. And of course then Dr. King became a proponent against the war. That is a simple act to benefit all sentient beings. That's why we call him Bhakkarato. Samasambuddhasa is a complicated word. First of all, Buddha, the last part, means to be awakened, to understand the body, the energy, and the mind, to understand the form, the perception, the sensation, the perception, the volition, back to Han again, Thich Nhat Hanh again, and the consciousness. Understand how karma is formed, and karma then becomes in a circle. If you understand that, anxiety is not an issue anymore. You can deal with that. There's plenty more to deal with. That is just the easy stuff to do. So Buddha is just someone who understands that, who is awakened. You and I can be Buddha. Anyone can be Buddha. Okay? But what's Samasam? It's two words. Sam means self. It's self-awakening. That's the path where you practice, you embrace the pain, you understand the pain, you let go of the pain, and you work on the mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feeling, mindfulness of the mind, and you continue to practice so that you are self-awakened. The other part is called Samasam, Sama Buddha, is when you actually practice awakening by being in, around, other beings by understanding their suffering is your suffering. By understanding that this space that you form between you and others is artificial. That if one being suffers, all beings suffers. By understanding that time is just a consequence of space. If you didn't have space, if there were no separation between you and I, there's no reason to travel, there's no time. So death becomes less an issue. It's just another part of your existence. And when you die, your body disintegrates. It goes back to the earth, but your mind stays. So in a circle, someone posted a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh and he talks about how he views about death. Because this is someone who has no longer have any concept of space and time. He is beyond all that. Now, Einstein said the same thing. Einstein talks about space and time the same way. He said Einstein talks about space and time that this is only exists in our universe and nowhere else. The beginning of the universe, the Big Bang Theory, is the creation of space, and it's after the creation of space that you have time. But if you could go beyond this universe, back into some place that we call the singularity, some people call that the black hole, there's no longer time and space. There's only information. There's only the mind. And that's the contribution of Stephen Hawking's, what's called the Hawking's radiation, that if a particle enters the black hole, it turns into energy, but something is left behind, and the information is left behind. Okay? So we're going to wrap this class again with a dedication to Thich Nhat Hanh, and by reciting the verses again, which I explained earlier. Namo Tasso, which means in honor of. Arahato is someone who is Thich Nhat Hanh, which means one path, who have entered the path, what we call the stream of enlightenment. And Arahato is someone who actually has reached the end goal of that. The beginning is someone who's Sodohanbon, is what's what we call the stream enterer. Okay, so there's that. That's what Arahato means. Bhagavato is not just a teacher, but someone who actually dedicated a life to the improvement of others. And Sama Sambuddhasam is someone who's on the path of being a Buddha, someone who's awakened, understanding the mind, the body, and the difference in how it all work together and elevate themselves to a point where they're no longer attached to the physicality. And Samasam is the two paths, is the self-awakening, and is also what we call the Bodhisattva, the one that we actually. So I'm going to recite that verse 3 times in order of Thich Nhat Hanh, and then I'm going to recite a sutta called the Metta Sutta, loving kindness, where we want to dedicate our merit today to all beings, learning the example of Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay? This is not a religious symbol. This means that our humbleness, our gratitude, and our appreciation for all the positive energy in the world. First, the verses 3 times. Namo Tasso Arahato Bhagavato Samo Sambuddhassa. In honor of a future Buddha, Thich Nhat Hanh. Namo Tasso Arahato Samo Sambuddhassa. Namo Tasso Arahato bhagavato samo sambuddhassa. The next one is a sutta called the Metta Sutta, the Loving Kindness Sutta. This is again in honor of Thich Nhat Hanh, to dedicate ourselves to the teaching of Thich Nhat Hanh, which is to bring relief from suffering to all beings. And in English it means, may all beings be free from animosity and negative energy. May all beings be free from mental suffering. May all beings be free from physical suffering. May all beings be full of joy and protected with positive energy. Now back to the verses again. It's called Sama Sambuddha. If you want the relief of your own anxiety, you dedicate yourself to the goodness of others. That is the quickest way. Sabha Sata Vayantu Sabha Sata Ayamajantu Sabha Sata Nagantu Sabha Sata Sukhi Hatano Pariharantu. Have a good journey, Thich Nhat Hanh. Your name says it all. One path only. Thank you very much.